This month's question is, how do you explain why Protestants only have 2 sacraments to a Catholic? And this question comes to us from Aaliyah. And I think the best way to answer this is to kind of give this history of how the term sacrament developed in the church. We know that at the time of Jesus told us to baptize. He told us to practice communion. And as the time went on, the church continued to do this all the way from Jesus' time all the way till now. But about 200 AD, there was a guy named Tertullian, and he's the first one, we think, that started using the term sacrament. And actually, the sacramental lists are very inconsistent. There's even some lists that have as many as 45 sacraments listed. But as time went on, the church realized that 45 or whatever the number was a little bit ridiculous, and they needed to really define what a sacrament was. And there was a guy in about the Middle Ages named Peter Lombard that really was instrumental in helping break down these many, many different sacraments people suggested to a manageable number. And that number became 7. And that's the number of sacraments the Catholic Church believe there are today. And when he was trying to define what a sacrament was, he said this: sacraments were therefore instituted for the sake of sanctifying as well as signifying. See, he's saying that when you take a sacrament, like communion, for example, it just doesn't symbolize something. It just doesn't mean something. It actually does something. You are infused with grace. You receive some kind of grace when you take communion. And this infusion of grace became the teaching of the church and had been in the past and continue to be on till today. But then we had the Reformation. And when the Reformation happened, there came to be 2 different kind of people as far as how they viewed sacraments. Now, this is a bit oversimplification. There's always more than 2, but I'm just going to simplify it and say there's only 2. The first would be something more like Martin Luther. He still believed in the sacraments. He thought there were 2 sacraments. He just thought that the 7 was more than what the Bible actually said there were. So he believed that marriage was important. He just didn't think marriage provided some special means of grace. And the reason he believed that was because he said the Bible didn't actually teach it. The only 2 things that the Bible taught were means of grace that actually provided some kind of sanctifying effect were baptism and communion. And then the other group that developed really started to quit using the term sacrament altogether. They started using the word ordinance, and over time, that's the only word they used. It was only ordinance, because what they wanted to differentiate themselves from the Catholic Church in was the fact that they didn't believe that baptism, communion, or anything else, any other physical action that you can do actually infused you with grace, that gave you any kind of grace at all. They believed that things like baptism and communion, all they did was symbolize what God had done. And the only way to receive the grace of God was through faith. It was through faith alone. So even if you took communion in faith, it's not like communion provided you any more extra grace than if you just had faith alone. They were just something that God gave us to remind us of what he had done for us on the cross. So, how do you explain why Protestants only have 2 sacraments to a Catholic? There's the story.